Singh. That's his new name. Butcher Singh.
Question, bro.
JAGMEET, don't sell out, bro. Don't sell out. Where you go? You're selling out, JAGMEET. Sell out, Singh, bro. You sold out a gone, bro. You sold out a gone.
Oh, hello. Do you have a warrant to be here?
When I'm Prime Minister, I will keep my promises.
So you want to vote for a pretty boy Canadian named Justin. What could possibly go wrong?
I made a mistake.
Hey everyone, quiet down. There's a bulletin on TV.
And now for this news flash.
The NDP leader was just asking about why the Prime Minister gave tens of millions of dollars in corporate handouts to powerful grocery chains. So the answer, of course, is that he voted to let the Prime Minister do that.
Mr. Speaker, we know that things are challenging for Canadians right now. Mr. Speaker, our government understands that this is a challenging time for too many families across the country.
Here out in Vancouver, I attended an end-of-year gala where the theme was Arabian Nights. And I dressed up in an Aladdin costume and put makeup on. I shouldn't have done that. Every politician has to make choices about what kind of leader they want to be. Are they the kind of leader that is going to exacerbate divisions, fears, and polarization?
His comedy routine, I was going to say that he shouldn't quit his day job, but actually, he should quit his day job.
Our opposite is showing us exactly what shameful, spineless leadership looks like. He shakes hands with white nationalists.
Ricky, green bastard, you are both disqualified!
Can we smoke out here?
Anita, how are you now?
Well, it's been quite a week, as I'm sure you've heard. May I show you my sister-in-law's gash?
Oh, we heard, so.
It's not our only ailment this week, unfortunately. Just yesterday, I cut my finger chopping wood. I continued to work, of course, while licking it occasionally to keep the blood from getting on my dress, but long and the short, I spent the whole afternoon licking my own axe wound.
The last thing I'd want is for the children to look out in the yard and see their mother licking her own axe wound.
Lavina's made lemonade, and I implore you to hydrate once. After all, you'll be hammering box all afternoon.
Hammering box?
My feed boxes were destroyed in the windstorm Wednesday last.
And I want to know, which one of you is going to pound my box?
Thank you.
I screwed that box for hours yesterday.
My Dick doesn't have the stamina he once did so we are grateful for your help once.
Everyone has an opinion about Canadian federal politics. Hey gang, what's up? Just Ehren right here, Question Period Canada. We started this channel about Canadian federal politics a number of months ago. Didn't have a clue any side on the side of the people at the grocery store lineup. That was it. And then we started watching Question Period Canada live. We started there making other videos, learning all about this stuff. Now we have a network. People send me videos. I've got so much content that I want to make. Now I'm trying to make a sort of general intro to all these wacky videos that are happening in Canada. Like, my oh my guys, we've got to take a closer look. Let's take a peek at this one. They never slow down, these Canadian politics. They don't stop. This one's wild.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Learned the terrible news that inflation is 35% above target. Again, after 8 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost of debt interest. And they can't do basic math over there. The 0.7 is actually a third higher than the 2% target. They're patting themselves on the back when they realize that Canadians can't afford to eat, heat, and house themselves. So why don't they, instead of quadrupling the carbon tax on the backs of Canadians, why don't they follow our common sense plan to suspend all gas and diesel tax until Labor Day?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader has quite proudly and publicly called for the Governor of the Bank of Canada to be fired. But maybe it's the Conservative leader who should lose his job because he just revealed his astonishing ignorance of the Bank of Canada's inflation target. The Bank of Canada has a target of between 1% and 3%, and for 4 months in a row, inflation in Canada has been within that target.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Not only does the incompetent finance minister not know the inflation target, she doesn't know that you lock in low rates when you have the chance. Remember, the Prime Minister was saying, don't worry, we can double the national debt because interest rates are low. Yep. Glenn, problem is, I told him at the time that they should lock in those rates for 10 years or 30 years with long-term bonds. It turns out they didn't do that, and now $400 billion of that debt will roll over into these higher rates, forcing Canadians to spend more on interest than on health care. Why did he hire the worst mortgage broker in the world to be our finance minister?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
The Conservative leader is in a grouchy mood today. And I think we all know why. The only thing he knows how to do is talk down Canada. And what he just cannot bear is the reality that thanks to our fiscally responsible economic plan, inflation is at a 3-year low. That's right. Inflation has been within the Bank of Canada for 4 months in a row. That's good news for Canada and Canadians. That's right.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Think that you pay down debt by borrowing more, that you stop inflation by printing money, and that you fight the drug overdose crisis by legalizing hard drugs. So at least they're consistent in their irrationality, Mr. Speaker. But now they've been forced to backtrack right before the election on their legalization of hard drugs because Canadians are revolting against the policy. Today we have a motion that will be voted in the House to permanently ban hard drugs. Will this government vote for that motion, or will they admit that they plan to legalize drugs again after the next election?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader is wearing more makeup than I am today. Now, I think it's wonderful.
I'm going to ask colleagues. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance to withdraw that comment. We don't comment on the appearances of members. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, I withdraw that comment.
Can continue with her. She has 25 seconds left on the clock for her answer.
The fact is, Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader is phony all the way through. He is phony when it comes to his concern about the economy. All he can do is talk our country down. And he is phony when he talks about his concern about the opioids crisis. He tries to score cheap partisan points. It's just not right, Mr. Speaker. That's right.
So gang, that's another wild one right there. I'm not gonna try to tell you what to think about what you just saw. You're a Canadian, you can make up your own mind, but I do want you to come back and watch some more of the wild videos that we collect. We've got this network happening now, and also, if you're interested in a live chat in a fun stream, we watch the question periods daily, all of them. It's a great community, it's a fun chat, come check us out. Like, subscribe, get notified.
A recent Nanos poll shows that when it comes to credibility, both Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre have scored poorly. although Poilievre secured a slightly higher score. Let's bring in the man, Nick Nanos, founder and chief data scientist at Nanos Research. Nick, thank you as always for joining us, sir.
Great to see you, Roger.
These credibility numbers for the two leaders, quite surprising. What did you use for factors before we get into the numbers themselves?
I look at these numbers. We basically ask a pretty simple question. We ask, for people, Canadians, to score the overall credibility of both of the two major party leaders. And as you can see, yes, Pierre Poilievre does nudge out Justin Trudeau, but this is a score out of 10, Roger. 0 to 10. I guess 5 is a fail.
Were you surprised by these? I'm blown away by these numbers.
Man, yeah, they're low. And here's the one thing. It speaks, Roger, to the polarization that is taking place in the Canadian electorate, at least on these two figures. Mm-hmm. And that what it means is that people are not happy with either one of those individuals, and they score their credibility low. So I guess the good news for Pierre Poilievre is 3.9. Versus 3.7. But, if this was a swimming pool, Roger, they'd both be drowning on credibility. They're not above water.
And different areas like different people, and there is a clear distinction when it comes to the sexes as well.
Yeah, exactly. Women were more likely to give a tip of the hat to Justin Trudeau. Canadians that live in Western Canada were more likely to give a tip of the hat to Pierre Poilievre. But, they're bad. The numbers are bad. They're bad for both of them, right? And I think for Pierre Poilievre, who still enjoys a significant lead over Justin Trudeau, this has to be a bit of a wake-up call, because it speaks to, it's actually not about him and his popularity. It's about him as an agent of change and people looking at the Conservatives.
Yeah, and for Trudeau, some of the emotions or the words that came to mind for him when they were asked, people came up with anger, cluelessness, and disgust.
Yeah, pretty dismal numbers, Roger, on this front. We ask Canadians the emotions that come to mind when each of the federal party leaders speaks. So for Justin Trudeau, you can see, the top three, people questioning his intelligence, anger, disgust. That sit on the positive side of the ledger. About 1 out of every 5 use words like believable, honest, and trustworthy and capable to describe the emotion that they felt when Justin Trudeau spoke. But here's the key takeaway. 1 out of 20 Canadians have something positive that comes to mind whenever Justin Trudeau speaks. It just points to the fact that people have formed opinions about him and that they're
1 out of 20.
Listen, yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Poilievre, on the other hand, we get dishonest but hopeful and confident. That is quite the combination.
Yeah, exactly. And this speaks to him being positioned as a potential agent of change. At the top of the list, hopeful combined with dishonest, confident, scared when they hear him talk. And we talked about Justin Trudeau, 1 out of 20 having something positive to say. For Pierre Poilievre, and this is better news, 1 out of 5 Canadians, right, have something positive to say or have a positive emotion that they associate when he speaks. But you know what, Roger, these are brutal numbers for both of those leaders. I don't think anybody's really enthusiastic. They might be angry about change. They might be worried about what Pierre Poilievre might represent, or angry at Justin Trudeau, or disappointed, but not bad. I don't know. I didn't want to get too bad. It's bad, Roger.
And so before we go, how does that play out for anything at the voting booth? Is this going to be an impact?
Yeah, well, you know what? We still, Roger, it's kind of like Groundhog Day every week when we chat. The Conservatives with an 18-point lead, 42-24, so still good news for them. The other key takeaway is coming out of the budget. The Conservatives are the only party that's up. You can see the opposition parties are both down a little bit within the margin of error, but you roll them up 4, down 4. So, this is why for Pierre Poilievre, yes, he's ahead, but there's not a lot of enthusiasm, and there's still a lot of people that don't consider him credible, but don't consider Justin Trudeau credible either.
All right. Well, we consider you credible, hopeful, optimistic. Nick, thank you as always for joining us, sir.
Take it easy, Roger.
Cheers.
Rick loves visiting Sun Life.
Considering the upcoming WHA meeting from May 27th to June 1st, I urge the World Health Organization and its members to recognize Taiwan's efforts and contribution to global health and to grant it full participation in the World Health Assembly. Let Taiwan help. It has lots to offer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Foothills.
After 9 years, this Liberal NDP government is not worth the cost to Canadian farmers, this time cutting funding to one of our most successful volunteer organizations. For 111 years, 4-H Canada has been teaching Canadian youth about community, farming, and leadership. But in one of his first moves, the Liberal Agriculture Minister celebrated this incredible milestone by slashing funding to 4-H by 30%, forcing them to restructure and putting incredible programs like the Citizenship Congress at risk. 4-H'ers learn by doing, working hard to promote sustainable agriculture and teaching Canadians about where their food comes from. Conservatives understand the importance of Canadian agriculture and being a champion for Canadian youth who are going to be driving innovation and future economic growth. That's why a future Conservative government will reverse the Liberal funding cuts to 4-H by diverting millions of dollars from Agriculture Canada, because our priority is not going to be useless consultants. Our priority is Canadian youth programs like 4-H.
The honourable member from Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
After 9 years of this Liberal NDP Prime Minister, more Canadians are hungry and homeless. The Parliamentary Budget Officer agrees. According to his report, the government is failing to meet their target of ending homelessness. In fact, it's getting worse, increasing 88% between 2018 and 2022, with nearly 80% purely based on affordability reasons. Since then, Mr. Speaker, with the help of their NDP enablers and grocery store lobbyist connections, food inflation is at a 40-year high. This is a direct result of a government that has refused to take responsibility for its actions. The response is always the same on their failures. It's not our fault, but don't worry, we will fix it later. The alarming stats on homelessness are outright insulting. These are not just numbers, Mr. Speaker, these are people. After nearly a decade in power, Canada is not recognizable, looking more like it did in 1934, not like it should in 2024, nor like it will under a common-sense Conservative government.
Before we move to the next speaker, I might ask the Assistant Sergeant at Arms just to ask people in the lobbies to please keep their voices down. It carries over into the House.
The Honourable Member for Sherbrooke. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What could be more unifying than a public market? It's a place where the community comes together. It's a showcase for our local producers and artisans. And under Sylvie Brunel, Sherbrooke's Marché de la Guerre has also become a place where magic simply happens. As coordinator of the Corporation du Marché de la Guerre, Ms. Brunel has, over the past few years, created a cohesive group of local players to offer Sherbrooke residents some incredible and amazing events. A visit to the Christmas market, for example, has become a tradition for many Sherbrooke families. Ms. Brunel never hesitates to lend a hand to liven up her events. She even plays Mrs. Claus herself, much to the delight of the young ones. She's also very involved with young entrepreneurs, welcoming them during the summer to give them their first sales experience. Having achieved her objectives, Madame Brunel has decided to devote herself to new projects. I wish her every success in the future and thank her on behalf of all Sherbrooke residents for her involvement in our community.
The honourable member from Churchill, Kiwatinook-Askey.
This past week, 3 more countries announced that they will be formally recognizing Palestine as a state. Around the world, the overwhelming reaction has been, it's about time. This means that 143 countries will recognize Palestine as a state. They recognize that Palestinian statehood is something that's granted. It's an inherent right. We're also seeing how empty the words are of those that support a two-state solution but argue there should not be a recognition of Palestinian statehood unless it's negotiated. Which brings us to this Liberal government. At a critical time in history, they stand for everything and and nothing. Where do they actually stand on Palestinian statehood? If there's one lesson from history, it's that it didn't just happen. The conflict in Palestine didn't just happen. A two-state solution is needed to build peace. It requires two states and the political will to make this happen. Our message in this parliament should be clear. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Recognizing Palestine as a state is being part of the solution. The Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs must take a stand for peace, for security, for justice.
The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to solidarity and mutual aid, we know what we're talking about in Lac-Saint-Jean. Over 5 years ago, the municipality of Saint-François-de-Sales, in my riding, became a vegetable food desert when the only grocery store in the area closed. It was almost impossible for many elderly people to get to larger municipalities. The community rolled up its sleeves in search of a solution. That's how the Saint-François Dépanneur came into being. Open year-round, 7 hours a day, 4 days a week, the Dépanneur is supported entirely by the work of volunteers. In fact, it was these same volunteers who designed it and who are now in charge of all operations. It's no surprise that the Saint-François Dépanneur is a source of pride for the municipality, and above all, it's a model that proves that in Lac-Saint-Jean, we've got a heart and soul, and that we never hesitate when it's time to pull together. To all the volunteers whose involvement makes a real difference in our community, from the very bottom of our hearts, thank you.
The Honourable Member from Carleton.
Today I rise in equal parts sadness and gratitude to honor the incredible life of a great Canadian, Rex Murphy. Rex was born a proud Newfoundlander. He became known as a pugnacious critic of those in power, even Joey Smallwood, and that wasn't easy in those days. He would go on to be a political assistant for both major political parties in that province, and then a national voice. He would give fantastic, spectacular rants on the CBC. Yes, even I watch CBC to listen to Rex. And he would then go on to host Cross Country Checkup, where he would listen with compassion and respect to the voices of the common people. He would write many, many pieces of good works in poetry, in storytelling, in polemics. And that voice will now be missed by all. And so I join with all Canadians in saying, thank you, Rex, for all you have done. May you rest in the peace of God.
The Honourable Member from Cambridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to recognize the work of the Military Veterans Wellness Program, championed by Toronto Police Constable Ehren. This program provides increased training and awareness for law enforcement assisting veterans in crisis. In my riding, Constables David Cassidy and Brian Serapiglia have been instrumental in bringing the program to Waterloo Region. Thanks to their initiative, we can provide our first responders with a better understanding of military culture and de-escalation training, and rapidly refer veterans to national support services. This partnership with Veterans Affairs Canada has expanded to 80 police forces, helping over 200 veterans to date. I encourage my colleagues, all of you in this House, here to reach out to your local law enforcement to ensure that they have access to this incredible free program. Together, Mr. Speaker, we all can equip Canadian law enforcement with the tools that they need to support veterans across Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral questions. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Here we go. Let's get it going.
After 9 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost, with a 38% increase in homelessness and 1/4 of Canadians skipping meals because of a lack of money. The Bloc voted for $500 billion in centralizing and inflationary spending to add to the another 100,000 public servants and doubling consulting spending. They said they had no choice because the government was going to shut down otherwise. Can the government inform the Bloc that this spending would have been adopted with the NDP regardless of how the Bloc voted?
L'honorable ministre.
The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I find this question somewhat hypocritical because the Conservative Party is talking about homelessness, but in their program and plans, this word doesn't even exist. I find it hypocritical of a party that voted in this House against all the measures that could have given homes to Canadians. And I think that, Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party needs to look at what the real intentions of the Conservative Party are with respect to the fight against homelessness. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition, the Prime Minister doubled the national debt, hiked taxes and inflation, saying that all this money would fund programs, generous programs, to eliminate homelessness. Since then, homelessness has risen by 38%, and 25% of Canadians skip meals because they don't have enough money. It's not because, with the support of the Bloc, the government it's spending all the money of Canadians. Why is the Bloc Liberal coalition forcing Canadians to feed this obese government rather than allowing them to feed Canadian families? The Honourable Minister of Economic Development. Mr. Speaker, it's so hypocritical. This party voted against the school food program. So when we're talking about feeding Canadians, let's start with children, and they're voting against it. When they say, yes, people are asking for money, we're giving them help. There's the child benefit, they're voting against it. And when we say we're going to help Canadians to have roofs over their head and pay their rent, they vote against it. Mr. Speaker, make up your mind. Do you want to help Canadians or cut their services?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the homelessness and hunger. He doubled the debt, increased taxes, and caused inflation, but said it was all to fund generous programs that would end homelessness. Well, homelessness is now up 38%, and a quarter of Canadians are skipping meals because they can't afford them. That's because his greedy government is consuming everything Canadians earn. Why is the NDP and Liberals forcing Canadians to feed this morbidly obese government instead of feeding their families?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, we will take no lessons from the Conservatives who purport to care about poverty and Canadians when every single time they vote against those supports, $10 a day childcare, early learning and childhood education. They're not supporting our budgetary measures to put food in school lunch boxes for 400,000 children, Mr. Speaker. It's unbelievable that they will at one hand say they support Canadians and on the other hand vote against those supports every single time. Thank you, Mr.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I'm grateful that the member points out that we have voted against every single policy that has caused homelessness to rise by 38%. Right. We have voted against every single inflationary policy that has forced 1/4 of Canadians to skip meals because they can't afford a meal on their table. Mr. Speaker, the government has doubled the debt, increased inflation, and blocked home building. Why is it that they force Canadians to feed this morbidly obese government rather than feeding their families?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, our government is actually focused on keeping inflation low so that interest rates can come down. And I will note that inflation has come down below the targeted range of 3%. And at the same time, Mr. Speaker, we have Budget 2024. We have supports for renters. We have supports for affordable housing. We have a national school food program on the table, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue to support Canadians with dental, with early childhood education, all the while the Conservatives vote against. Mr. Speaker, there's no plan on that side of the House. We will support.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
She repeats the same costly promises the Prime Minister has been breaking for 9 years. Mr. Speaker, in a 6-week period, 50 homeless encampments have opened in Toronto. Let that sink in. There are a total of 256 tent cities in Toronto alone.
Oh my goodness.
It wasn't like this before this Prime Minister, and it won't be like this after he's gone. Will he admit that everything is broken after 9 years of his government?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Of course, Mr. Speaker, when that member was a minister and had responsibility for housing, that there were more than 2 million more Canadians living in poverty. And the number of times that he talked about vulnerable people or taking action to help homeless, zero. He wants to hold out to people in a time of difficulty across the world that the solution is to cut the programs they need, to take away dental care, to take away pharmacare, and shame on him for it. We will stand up for vulnerable people in a way he never has.
The honourable member for La Prairie. The honourable member for La Prairie. The Hogue Commission has complained that the Liberals are still being secretive with respect to foreign interference. The PMO is invoking cabinet confidence to redact documents and even to prevent the judge from having access to them. We're not even talking about documents that will be published. We're talking about the documents needed for the judge's investigation, who then has a mandate to protect strategic information. This calls into question the entire effectiveness of this commission. The Minister of Public Security has promised that the judge will have access to all the documents. Does he agree that all of this hiding is enough? Enough is enough? The Honourable Minister of Public Security. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate greatly the question from my Bloc colleague, and I also appreciate working with him and my other colleagues last summer when we established the Hogue Commission. He knows full well that we are committed to sharing with the Commission in an exceptional time, which is not often. We accepted to share information from the Cabinet like we did under Mr. Johnson. We're always available to work with the Commission to ensure that they have access to all the appropriate documents. The honourable member for La Prairie. They just can't help it. Let me remind you, the reason we created the Hogue Commission was precisely because the Liberals have been covering up foreign interference since day one. The Commission was committed to put an end to all that. And let's get to the bottom of this through a neutral, non-partisan judge. The public doesn't need to read all the confidential information, but the judge does. That's precisely her mandate. If the Commission doesn't have access to all the information, Quebecers will lose confidence in this inquiry. Will the Liberals finally be responsible and above all transparent with the judge? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, the answer is yes. We will continue to remain transparent and cooperative with the Commission. I agree with my colleague. This is an exceptional justice, like the Justice Hogue, and is in a good position to give Canadians the trust they need in our institutions. And Canadians have to understand that at all times the government will ensure that the Commission does have access to all the necessary documents to do this important work. And I greatly appreciate the work I was able to do with my friend from La Prairie. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-le-Petit-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, its waters are warming too fast, becoming increasingly acidic and containing less and less oxygen. This is the worrisome state of the St. Lawrence River. Scientists are sounding the alarm. We've reached fatal oxygen level for several aquatic species. The time has come to give the river a legal personality. But the Minister of the Environment is ignoring this serious problem. What will it take for this Minister of the Environment to give the St. Lawrence River rights to protect Quebec's biodiversity? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. I'd like to remind him that when we came to power in 2015, Canada wasn't even protecting 1% of our territorial waters, and now we're up to 15% and 20% next year. at least 30% by 2030. So this is our objective that all countries agreed on at COP15 in Montreal. And we have established record amounts with partnerships across the country to protect our territory. Thank you.
The honourable member from Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, families saw their homes burned to the ground in northern British Columbia this week, and summer hasn't even started. Yet the Conservatives don't seem to think that climate change is real. Yep. And this environment minister offers up nothing but empty words and delays. Yeah. The Liberals refuse to invest the $1 billion needed for a BC watershed security fund that would prevent wildfires and save lives. They knew this wildfire season was going to be devastating for communities, yet they're leaving British Columbians to fend for themselves. Will the government fix their mistake and immediately establish a BC watershed security fund? Yeah.
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Speaker, and certainly the issues that we've seen around forest fires last year and unfortunately this year, particularly in British Columbia and in the Fort Nelson area, have been devastating, and certainly our hearts go out to all those folks that were affected. It is the reason why we have set aside $350 million to help provinces procure equipment. It is the reason why we are actually training forest fires, and fundamentally, it is the reason why we have a comprehensive climate plan to ensure that we are addressing the existential threat of climate change. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party of Canada has a climate plan. It is to let the planet burn. It is irresponsible. It is shameful.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
A hat trick for the Prime Minister, but not the good type. 3 reports released in just one day paint a devastating picture of life in Canada after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government. Food Banks Canada, the Salvation Army, and the Parliamentary Budget Officer all say there is more homelessness and there is more hunger. They kept telling us that they're spending our money for our own good, and everything is fine, and it's not their fault. Mr. Speaker, it's been 9 years. Right. Whose fault is it?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, grocery price inflation is coming down. 1.4% in April, down from 1.9% a month before. This is encouraging news, certainly for Canadians, but it's important to know that our government put forward the most comprehensive package of competition reforms in Canadian history. Why? Because more competition equals better prices. But it's a bit rich for the Conservatives to point to food bank lineups when they oppose a national school food program that's going to feed over 400,000 kids across Canada.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
And 9 years later, it hasn't fed a single child. They just don't get it. The very policies that they have delivered has given us the worst quality of life in half a century, the worst since the last Trudeau ran this place. In the past 3 months, 25% of young adults have had to go to a food bank in this country, 38% more homelessness after they promised to end it, and about 50% of Canadians are worse off this year than they were last year. How does this government have so much money to spare while ordinary Canadians are literally going hungry and homeless?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Quite the statement from the Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party. My advice to her is to actually read the report from the Parliamentary Budget Officer. In that report, she will see that no less than 50,000 Canadians are supported by the National Housing Strategy, specifically the Reaching Home program that they would cut. We know they champion an austerity agenda. This also from the Deputy Leader, who made clear only a few weeks ago on a yacht, no less, Mr. Speaker, that less homes have to be built in Canada. They're siding with the NIMBYs. We want to build more homes, including for the most vulnerable in this country, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Stormont Dundas, South Glengarry.
Duncan. After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, Canadians are hungry and homeless. It's becoming more clear. The more inflationary spending they do, the worse it gets for Canadians. And look no further than the Ottawa Food Bank report that came out this week that said 500,000 visits were made to the food bank in our nation's capital last year. That's a 95% increase in the last 5 years, a 22% increase in the last year alone, and 36% of them were children. How many more times are they going to hike the carbon tax before they realize it's driving millions of more people to food banks?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I find it more than ironic that the Conservative member across the way mentions children when he's going to stand up in short order and oppose a national school food program. A national school food program that Food Banks of Canada and Food Secure Canada have advocated for over 10 years because they know that it will impact food insecurity in this country in a dramatic way. $1 billion in the federal budget 2024 to feed 400,000 more kids, and the Conservatives say, no, we won't support that.
Shameful.
The Honourable Member from Stormont Dundas, South Glengarry.
And after 9 years, Mr. Speaker, that program has fed exactly 0 children in this country. The only thing it's doing is feeding the bureaucracy here in Ottawa. Well, let's take a look and see what Food Banks Canada had to say about their poverty measures. Their report card came out this week, and this government got an F, a failing grade for what they're doing as they're driving millions of more people to food banks each and every year. Their report says it's only going to get worse the more they hike the carbon tax and make life more expensive. How many more damning reports need to come out before they axe the carbon tax to help with the price of food?
The Honourable Minister for Families and Children.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to share today some of the response from Budget 2024 and the announcement of the funding of the National School Food Program. Breakfast Clubs of Canada, Mr. Speaker, released a statement saying that this program marks a turning point in the country's commitment to the well-being of children. Children learn best on a full stomach, Mr. Speaker, and investments today in children are investments for tomorrow. On this side of the House, we will continue to invest in the well-being of children, and I think the Conservatives owe Canadians an explanation why they won't make these investments.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-l'Érable. After 9 years of this Liberal Prime Minister, Quebecers are hungry and increasingly taking to the streets. This week, there were 3 devastating reports confirming that the inflationary spending of the Liberals, supported by the Bloc, is hurting families and workers. And according to the Salvation Army, 25% of parents skip meals to be able to feed their children. How come the Bloc and this Prime Minister, who aren't worth their salt, preferred to feed this fat federal government rather than Quebecers? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, once again, I would ask my colleague to tell his colleagues from the Conservative Party to include in their plans, if they're serious about supporting Canadians, the word homelessness, fight against poverty, investing in Canadians. I could give them some ideas, starting by voting in favor of programs that we're establishing to tackle poverty, rent, housing, and feeding children. I think that would be the very base. The Honourable Member from Mégantic-l'Érable. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Prime Minister, this Liberal government, supported by the Bloc, has caused this crisis, and now they want to be applauded? Mr. Speaker, it's not only responsible, well, because of the $500 billion in inflationary spending that this Prime Minister established and the Bloc supported, which is affecting gas, housing, everything costs more. Many more Canadians are lining up at food banks. They're the one who created this crisis. Will the Prime Minister admit it's time to curb the centralizing government's appetite so that all Quebecers can finally eat well? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind people who are listening today and Canadians, if it was up to the Conservative government throughout the biggest pandemic we have experienced, people would have suffered enormously, Mr. Speaker. Today, we're in a better position because a Liberal government was there to support Canadians in their biggest crisis that we have ever seen. And today, what we're asking them is simple. Adopt reform on dental care. Adopt reform on food measures and housing. But they're voting against all of this. The Honourable Minister for Trois-Rivières. Let's go back to the case of the member for Glengarry Prescott Russell. To prevent his dismissal as president of the Association des Parlementaires de la Francophonie, or the APF, the Liberals infiltrated this organization. They signed up massive numbers to boost the number of Liberals from 25 to 112, including a whole bunch of unilingual Anglophones. For the first time, the APF had...
Sometimes I get tired of the Bloc Québécois. They just... always with the translators? What are you going to do? Back to the French.
Minister, Global Affairs.
Oh,
Canada will always be here to support Francophones internationally. In fact, Canada is the co-founders of the International Association of la Francophonie. I'd like to remind my colleague that is a parliamentary, an assembly, APF, and we are going to continue not only to support this assembly, but also become proud of the fact that it is a great Canadian, a Franco-Ontarian, who is chair of this assembly. So we are here to be French in Quebec and across the country and worldwide. The honourable member for Trois-Rivières. Correction. Just imagine, to protect a Liberal who denies the decline of French in Quebec, and also responsible for the decline of the APF. But the responsibility doesn't end there. All these new French enthusiasts at the APF read the OQLF report yesterday. It ranks Quebec #1 with the lowest proportion of workers using French most often, the federal public service. The Liberals are responsible for the Anglicization machine in Quebec workplaces. When will they stop fueling the decline of French? The Honourable Minister of Global Affairs. Mr. Speaker, we have absolutely no lessons to learn from the Bloc because we know their objective is still to show that only sovereignty in Quebec will work for Quebecers. But Quebecers aren't fooled. They know that they have a strong government, a government that recognizes that there is a decline in French for the first time in Quebec and across the country, and we are able to reinvest in the improvement and protection of French, to be here for Francophones across the country, so we have really no lessons to learn from them. The honourable member for Trois-Rivières. Oh, that makes me laugh. The federal government is Quebec's worst employer for French. Coincidentally, it's the main employer in the Gatineau region. Between 2016 and 2021, the proportion of Gatineau residents working primarily in French fell from 77% to 62%, a drop of 17% in only 4 years. We're talking about Gatineau, Hull-Elmer, Pontiac, La Petite Nation, 4 Liberal MPs. Their public service is the worst workplace in Quebec for French, and coincidentally, French is declining in Gatineau more than elsewhere. Instead of protecting their colleague at the APF, will they protect Francophones in Gatineau? The Honourable Minister, Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, I am very proud of our Quebec participation in the government's federal public service. We grew Quebec's participation in the federal public service. We are very proud to have public service jobs, and we are also very proud of Quebecers' participation on the other side of the river. So yes, Mr. Speaker, we are a bilingual government that takes care of both official languages on both sides of the river.
The honourable member from Tobic-Mactaquac.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, more Canadians are hungry and homeless. We see it across the country with our own eyes, and it's now affirmed by Food Banks Canada's latest report. According to the report, nearly 50% of Canadians feel financially worse off compared to last year, and 1 in 4 people are going hungry. I've heard from several food banks that the fastest growing demographics they serve are working families and seniors. Mr. Speaker, the character of a nation is revealed in how it treats its most vulnerable, and Canada is failing them. When will this NDP Liberal government get off their backs, respond to their desperate pleas? How about starting now by axing the carbon tax? Yeah.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I am glad to see that Conservatives are finally aligning themselves with Food Banks Canada. We saw over a decade of the Harper Conservatives. They did nothing to address food insecurity in Canada. Today, what our government is doing is we're creating more competition in the marketplace, and we're investing in a national school food program, both of which the Conservatives oppose. I don't know how the Conservatives can say they care about struggling Canadians when they oppose and would take food out of the mouths of children.
Shameful.
The Honourable Member from Tobique-Mactaquac.
Mr. Speaker, what an incredibly all-encompassing and comprehensive non-answer that was from the member. Mr. Speaker, just a couple of months ago, I visited the food bank in Oromocto, New Brunswick. Oromocto is home to Base Gagetown, Canada's largest military base. We were shocked when we discovered from the director of the food bank there that they serve upwards of 50 service military members and their families. That's 1 out of every 10 clients they serve. Mr. Speaker, our brave men and women deserve better, and they are asking for this government to do the right thing. It's not more than what they can give right now. Why don't they start by axing the tax and getting off their backs?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I marvel at the temerity of a person who would stand in this House and vote against a pay raise, a well-earned pay raise for every member of the Canadian Armed Forces, and vote against that pay raise and then stand up and pretend that they actually care about the men and women who serve our forces.
The Honourable Member from Regina Leuven.
After 9 long years, this Prime Minister is simply not worth the cost. The numbers out from the Canada Foods Bank are damning. 50% of Saskatchewan people feel they're worse off this year than last year. 35% of Saskatchewanians are afraid they're not going to be able to feed themselves or their family. This NDP Liberal Caucus Coalition can do the right thing right now and axe a tax so parents can put food on the table for their kids.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
What is clear, Mr. Speaker, is that that member and that party want to ruin the rebate for Canadians. What is also clear, they've mentioned homelessness in this House today. Quite a shock, Mr. Speaker, and hypocritical. If you look at their housing plan, it never mentions homelessness. They don't want to do anything on these things. And if you want to understand the compassion of the party opposite and of their leader specifically, look a few months ago what the leader did. He went to someone's home, stood in front of it, and called it a shack. A member of the working class, Mr. Speaker, that's a respect they have for working people. They're not a serious party, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Liberals made the decision to expand the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which will result in 7 times more tanker traffic in Burrard Inlet. People in Port Moody, Coquitlam, and Morin-Belcarra are at risk of evacuation, fire, smoke, inhalation, and carcinogens in the event of a spill. The government of BC and the local health authorities are asking for a plan to protect people. Yet the Liberals have no plan, and the Conservatives have no concern to keep people safe. What are the Liberals going to do to protect Canadians in my riding and beyond from a catastrophic spill?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is, of course, incredibly important that as we move products to market, we do so in a safe and efficient manner. Certainly, the transport of oil by pipeline is far safer than the transport of oil by rail. It is important, though, that we put in place measures to assure British Columbians and Canadians that this will be done safely. Enormous time was spent on ensuring that we put in place those provisions with respect to the pipeline, but also with respect to marine shipping. Certainly, the Canadian Energy Regulator has played an important role in that. We will ensure that all of those safeguards are put into place and that the pipeline operates in a safe and efficient manner.
The Honourable Member from Timmins James Bay.
The poisoning of people in grassy narrows represents an unprecedented corporate crime. For over 60 years, the government has covered up and protected corporate criminality, and the result has been a never-ending nightmare for people suffering mercury poisoning that impacts everyone, including young children. We now learn that the Dryden Fiber Mill has been dumping sulfates into the Wabigoon River, which has been driving the mercury crisis for a new generation. So what steps will the Minister of Environment take to hold that company to a court, to account, and to work with the people of Grassy Narrows to finally clean up the disaster in the Wabigoon River?
Here.
The Honourable Parliamentary
Happy hour
Secretary.
somewhere.
What's happening at Grassy Narrows is a tragedy, and all levels of government need to do better. Indigenous Services Canada is supporting several projects that will help meet the needs of the community without leaving home. Budget 2024 also provides an additional $57.5 million for the construction of the Mercury Care Home. This ongoing calamity, tragedy at Grassy Narrows is a reminder of what happens if we don't protect our water sources from pollution. That's also why we introduced the First Nations Clean Water Act to make sure First Nations have tools to protect their water sources and hold polluters accountable.
The Honourable Member from Kitchener-Conestoga.
Mr. Speaker, in conversations, women, more than men, face being constantly interrupted. When women express their ideas, they often go unrecognized until reiterated by a man. When women push back, they're seen as less likable, and negative labels are disproportionately applied to them. It's critical now, more than ever, that men speak up to defend women's rights and underscore their support for lasting gender equality. Could the Minister of Justice reiterate our government's support on the importance of male allyship and ways our government is addressing this issue?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada.
Mr. Speaker, I'm an ally and I'm speaking up. I'm speaking up about the epidemic of gender-based violence. I'm speaking up about women having full control over their bodies and their reproductive rights. That includes the right to abortion and the right to free contraception. When we as men make spaces for women's voices, we not only learn, we help create better, more inclusive policies. I urge every man in this chamber from every single party to stand up and to be that ally. The fight for gender equality in this country is a fight for all of us.
The Honourable Member from Kelowna Lake Country.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister, more Canadians are hungry and homeless. The government promised to end chronic homelessness in Canada by 2030. The Parliamentary Budget Officer found homelessness is getting worse, with chronic homelessness up 38%. The vast majority of homeless individuals in Canada, 80%, are homeless purely based on affordability reasons. This Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. How can this government spend so much with such failing results?
The Honourable Minister for Families and Children.
Mr. Speaker, I have a really hard time listening to the Conservatives on that side of the House profess concern for Canadians who are struggling when we continue to see them vote against the measures that we put forward to support Canadians when they need us. Efforts to support and strengthen the social safety net, like $10 a day childcare, like moving forward with a national school food program, like moving forward with dental care to ensure they get the care that they need. We will continue to fight for Canadians, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Peterborough-Kawartha.
Mr. Speaker, maybe that minister needs to fight for Canadians by actually listening to them and talking to them. Because after 9 years of that Liberal NDP Prime Minister, things have never been worse. Canadians are more hungry and they're homeless. The Parliamentary Budget Officer confirmed what most Canadians already know, which is homelessness has increased 38% despite them promising to end it. But wait, it gets worse. From the front page of the Toronto Star, City to prioritize larger homeless encampments in new strategy as number of tents cities grow citywide. When did the Prime Minister simply give up and say, you know what? A tent is good enough.
The Honourable Minister for Children, for Families, Children and Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've said it again. Once again, we hear the Conservatives stand in this House and profess their support for Canadians. But I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that's not what we see day after day. When we we put forward measures like the National School Food Program to ensure 400,000 more children have access to food at school. What do we see, Mr. Speaker? The Conservatives vote against. We put forward the Canada Child Benefit. What do we see, Mr. Speaker? They vote against. We will fight for...
The honourable member from South Shore, St. Margaret's.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the hunger and the homelessness. This Prime Minister promised to end homelessness. The result of the posturing, long-term homelessness is up 38% because Canadians can't afford a place to live. More Liberal help like this will produce greater misery for Canadians. The NDP Liberal government doesn't understand that you can't spend your way out of a problem. When will the Liberals use common sense and realize that funding gatekeepers does not end homelessness?
Hear, hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
It is a tragedy, Mr. Speaker, any time a Canadian doesn't have a roof over their head. That's unacceptable, and it's incumbent on all of us to live up to the challenge, to work together to make sure this is addressed in a way that's not politicized, Mr. Speaker, but they're not capable of that, as we see. He talks about funding gatekeepers. What he's really talking about is working with, for example, not-for-profit organizations. There's an acquisition fund that we worked with not-for-profits to make possible $1.5 billion. As a result, we will see that program move forward and units of housing kept affordable for everyday people. He's against it, as are they.
The honourable member from South Shore, St. Margaret's.
Well, let's take a look at the record that they are so proud of. The results: homeless in Halifax have grown from 284 in 2015 to over 1,200 now. The housing minister gave taxpayer money to Halifax to hire 30 more gatekeeper bureaucrats. After 9 years, the NDP Liberal Prime Minister, there are now over 30 homelessness encampments in Halifax. Again, will the Liberals use common sense and realize that funding gatekeepers does not build homes?
Yes.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, I point him to the so-called housing plan of the Leader of the Opposition, which says nothing about homelessness. So they can talk about this, but we know how serious they are. They're not serious at all. The gatekeepers that he talks about in this case are really municipal officials, mayors and councillors, for example, and others, who have seen in Halifax, in London, Ontario, in Brampton, across the country, 170 plus communities who understand that zoning changes are fundamental to getting more homes built. Missing middle housing, excuse me, Mr. Speaker, fourplexes, duplexes, triplexes, all of that is made possible, and they're against it, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Drummond. Today we're here debating federal encroachment on Quebec and provincial jurisdictions, and one striking example is the research chairs. The federal government is meddling in higher education and determining which fields of study our universities should put first if they want to get their share of the funding. Worse still, with their EDI criteria, Ottawa is deciding not only what subjects will be studied, but who teaches them. Ottawa is literally taking control over our universities. Why doesn't Ottawa let universities hire professors on their own based solely on merit? The Honourable Minister. That's so rich, Mr. Speaker. We thought the Bloc was going to pick a fight in other areas, but now it's even the universities. We invested $3.5 million in science all across the country in our last budget to help researchers and professors in our universities. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc should be delighted that we're investing in research and science. We know that people at home are delighted about that, and we will continue to invest in science in Canada. The honourable member for Drummond. People are delighted, but not by answers like that. Isabelle Haché gave the example of 2 computer science professor positions at UW, one open strictly to sexual and gender minorities, and the other only to racialized minorities. Forget about merit. It's like the case of a biology professor at Laval University 2 years ago. Who cares about qualifications? The university explained that they were simply complying with federal requirements. Ottawa has it wrong. You don't fight discrimination by discriminating. When are they going to put an end to these criteria that do more harm to universities than good for inclusion? The Honourable Minister of Innovation and Science. I want to make sure Quebecers watch. I bet you Quebecers are pulling their hair out. Imagine the Bloc is picking a fight over science. Imagine that. I think they're at the back of their playbook if they're finally deciding, oh, now it's time to pick a fight about funding for science. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to invest in our universities, in research and development, in science. We will help our young people because we know that today's science builds tomorrow's economy. We will continue investing in science, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Prime Minister, overspending and anti-farm policies are pushing more and more farmers into bankruptcy. According to the UPA, 1 in 5 farms can no longer afford to pay off their debt. With the help of the Bloc, the government is stifling our agricultural sector by blocking Bill C-234 and voting for more centralizing and inflationary spending. When will this government take our agricultural sector seriously and give it a break so it can feed our already starving population? The Honourable Minister and Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party knows full well that the price on pollution does not apply to Quebec, and he only needs to step forward 4 rows to speak to his leader if he wants to see Bill C-234 passed here in the House. It's the leader of the official opposition who determines the fate of that bill. The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, what a typical response from the Liberal minister. They sit in their limos, out of touch with reality. Quebecers and Canadians are starving, thanks to this Prime Minister and the Bloc. Clearly, they're not worth the cost. In my region, food bank use is at an all-time high, 1 in 4 people. Over the past year, 10% of farms in the Chaudière-Appalaches region have gone under. When will this government finally get it and give our farmers the help they need? The Honourable Minister of Tourism. Mr. Speaker, as you know, I'm also responsible for economic development in the regions of Quebec. And if there's one thing that can help all the regions, it's agriculture. We have supported the processing and the transformation of farms, the green transition, to make sure they contribute to net zero. Mr. Speaker, we are present in and operating in all areas of Quebec, and we will continue to be there to support this transition. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Leflore. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Prime Minister, more and more Quebecers are hungry and homeless. The inflation crisis hitting Canadians is the result of the centralizing and inflationary spending of this government, which is 100% Bloc-backed. The Bloc, which claims to defend the interests of Quebecers, voted in favor of $500 billion in budgetary appropriations, which are fueling inflation. So it's not just this Prime Minister who's not worth the cost, it's the Bloc too. Do the Bloc and the Liberals understand that the more money goes to Ottawa, the less money there is for Quebecers? The Honourable Minister of Innovation. I can say one thing that people watching at home will understand. They know that here on this side of the House, we're willing to invest in Canadians. People can see that the Conservatives' plan is to cut all programs. They have the nerve to stand up today, and those watching will see that all the Conservatives who've stood up today voted against the Canada Child Benefit. They voted against the dental program. They will vote against the school food program. I don't know how they can even look at themselves in the mirror, but today we've seen the true colors of the Conservative Party.
Honourable Member from Charlottetown.
Mr. Speaker, my province of Prince Edward Island has saved more than $2 million in out-of-pocket costs since the launch of PEI's co-pay program last year. This federal funding for PEI has improved access to prescription drugs and made them more affordable for islanders. The success of this pilot can be replicated across the country. Can the Minister of Health describe the impact that universal single-payer coverage for contraception and diabetes medication will have on the health of Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to start by commending the advocacy and work of the member for Charlottetown, who's been working tirelessly to make sure that Islanders get the coverage they need, saving them hundreds of dollars. And I can tell you that in the many times I've been out with him in Prince Edward Island over the last 10 months, that getting to talk to people what that means, not just for affordability, but for prevention, to make sure they don't wind up with a chronic disease or illness. And I'll tell you, the Conservatives say it's too much for people to hope that they can get the medicine that they need. They say it's too much to hope that somebody can get the dental care that we need. 100,000 people got dental care in just 3 weeks. We are getting it done, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
At his billion-dollar green slush fund, the Prime Minister's hand-picked chair is being investigated for lining her own pockets and resigned in disgrace. After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, this Prime Minister clearly isn't worth the cost or that corruption. But another NDP Liberal appointed director has been caught funneling $42 million to companies that she has stakes in. The Liberals knew it, but then they promoted her to the infrastructure bank anyway. But wait, she suddenly resigned. They gave her keys to a bigger mansion after burglaring the first one. Will they investigate every dollar she handed out?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation and Science.
Mr. Speaker, now you're seeing the Conservative Party of Canada going after any company, Mr. Speaker, that will work against climate change in this country. That's what these Conservatives are about, Mr. Speaker. Behind these questions, they're against new technology to help fight climate change. They know very well, and I've said it many times in this House, the moment we heard about delegation, we launched an investigation. The chair has resigned, the CR has resigned. We are investigating. We're going to make sure that every dollar, Mr. Speaker, that is spent is going to be well spent. We're going to restore governance, we're going to restore confidence, and we're going to keep investing in Canadian companies, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
It's really too late that we only see the minister get animated after they get caught. Speaker, the NDP Liberal appointed chair and another director were caught stuffing their pockets full of taxpayer cash. They got caught, they resigned, they're being investigated, but then a third one who was found to be furthering her own interests was then appointed to the infrastructure bank, but suddenly resigned, much to the surprise of the minister responsible. This is life after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government. They have no idea where the money is going. We need to protect Canadian tax dollars. Will they call in the RCMP to investigate?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, that's the same question he just asked and that the minister just answered. But while we're here and have some time, Mr. Speaker, I want to know why there is a woman in Aurora named Sabrina Maddow and another one, and they're both women, by the way. Her name is Rachel Gilliland, alleging things that don't seem quite kosher in Conservative nomination land. And that is after the accusations by Ms. Maddow of illegality in the Conservative nomination, and they just happen to be the only two women in that nomination race. Why?
Order. I know that all honourable members, all ministers. Order. I know that all members and especially all ministers understand that, of course, that when questions are asked, there should be about the administration of the government or the committees. And it's the same thing which is expected of ministers to respond to the administration of government. The honourable member from Vancouver Quadra. Oh, excuse me, I've made a mistake. The honourable member from St. Albert, Edmonton.
Speaker, after the Prime Minister got caught turning a blind eye to Beijing's interference in our elections, his government was dragged kicking and screaming into calling a public inquiry. It has now been revealed that the Prime Minister and the Cabinet are obstructing the work of the inquiry by refusing to turn over documents to the Commissioner. A simple question: will the Prime Minister end the obstruction and turn over all documents requested by Madam Justice Hogue, unredacted, yes or no?
The Honourable Minister for Public Security.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend knows very well that there's no obstruction at all. He should have a word with his House Leader, with whom I worked very collaboratively all summer in setting up the Hogg Commission. We agreed to all the details of the terms of reference, including the fact that solicitor-client privilege and cabinet confidence were essential things that needed to be protected. And, of course, the people that served in Mr. Harper's government would know the attachment Mr. Harper had to those principles. But our government went a step further and made available cabinet documents that were relevant to this inquiry, and will continue to do everything necessary to allow them to do their work.
Hear, hear. And now it is the turn of the member from Vancouver Quadra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government stands proudly on the side of Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms. But if elected, the opposition, the official opposition, could become the first federal government to create laws that knowingly violate Canadians' rights. They would do this by invoking the notwithstanding clause, trampling on our charter. As a parliamentarian, but even more as a Canadian, I find this simply chilling. Will the Minister of Justice please elaborate on the importance of protecting Canadians' charter rights?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, the Charter protects your right to free expression. It protects your right to worship whom you choose. It protects your right to equality, and it protects your right to be presumed innocent. If you stand for freedom, you don't get to cherry pick which rights and freedoms you defend. But that's exactly what the Leader of the Opposition has said he would do. He has openly declared that he would use the notwithstanding clause to trample on these very charter rights. No federal leader has ever done this in Canadian history. Our government enacted the Charter, our government stands by the Charter, and we will always defend the charter rights and freedoms of every Canadian.
The Honourable Member from Skeena, Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, decades ago, the Liberals promised to stop the closure of rural post offices. But in classic Liberal fashion, they've broken that promise year after year after year. We've lost 500 rural post offices since 1994, 33 last year alone. And before the Conservatives start heckling, their record when they were in government was even worse. How many rural post offices are going to have to close before this minister finally does something?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question from the member opposite because he speaks to a very relevant issue that's affecting Canada, all across Canada, not just in his community but everywhere. We're working closely with Canada Post to ensure that we change its ways so as we can improve delivery across the country. It's a serious issue. We recognize that. We're having deliberations over it. We're working closely with Canadians, and we're going to be spending more time to discuss how we can improve the operations of the organization to better serve Canada. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Spadina, Fort York.
Mr. Speaker, congratulations to the Liberal government. Congratulations on achieving the highest interest rates in 2 decades, on sustained high food prices not seen since the 80s, and reducing Canadian living standards to almost the lowest levels in 40 years. Mr. Speaker, spread out over 20 years and beyond the next election, Budget 2024 solves nothing. Yes, Mr. Speaker, Canada has come a long way since 2015. Unfortunately, it's in the wrong direction. Given a long list of failures, will the finance minister resign, take the entire cabinet with her, and go paint leadership posters for Mark Carney?
Well,
the Honourable
good
President
one
of the
from
Treasury Board.
Independent.
Mr. Speaker, our government is focused on keeping inflation low so that interest rates can come down. We have a fiscally responsible plan, and we will continue to maintain strong economic indicators, a AAA credit rating, the lowest net debt to GDP ratio in the G7, all the while having supports for Canadians in Budget 2024, such as affordable housing, such as ECE and early childhood learning, such as supports for a national school food program. Mr. Speaker, we have a comprehensive plan and we're compassionate. Thank you.
And so we come to the end of question period. And I'm going to ask all members to take their conversations outside before we hear la déclaration hebdomadaire de la nation.
It is now time for the weekly statement.
Is to try to stiff arm us. Chrystia Freeland has been asking for this, who wanted this study to take place.
Mr. Chair. Simply wrong. And I would ask my colleague to be factual. He can talk about the last 2.5 years having a confidence supply agreement. There was no 9 years of coalition government between the Liberal NDPs in the last 9 years.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to my colleague, Mr. Giovanni, for his very eloquent speech and recap of today's reality of what Canadians are facing after 9 years of this Liberal NDP government. I think it's important because other colleagues have tried to recap how we got here today. So I think it's important that we really find out why we are where we are today. Let's not forget we did all as a committee try to get Mark Carney here to this committee. It was actually Mr. Davies who blocked that proposal with support or whatever deal he broke with the Liberals. We're just not sure yet, but whatever it was, it worked. Mr. Davies was the first to jump on that. So he tried to block that. He was successful in that. And then let's turn to why we are where we are today. This was the first time in my entire parliamentary experience where I'd seen a parliamentary secretary from the government, so Mr. Turnbull, block the government's own legislation on Bill C-69. Let's not forget we had witnesses in this room, and Mr. Turnbull decided to table drop a motion, a heavy-handed motion, which was not discussed beforehand, but we know for a fact that NDP got that motion the night before, which none of the rest of us got in this room, from the Conservative side or the Bloc as far as we know. But Mr. Davies knew about it. And they tried to use a heavy hand, as they always do, within what they've been doing for the last 9 years with their costly coalition, is to try to stiff arm us.
I tried this last Friday, but got an incredibly biased decision from the chair at that time. There is no coalition for 9 years. You're allowed to have great latitude to this committee, but you're not allowed to rewrite history. Saying that the last 9 years of coalition government is like saying the last 9 years was a American Republican government. It's simply wrong. And I would ask my colleague to be factual. He can talk about the last 2.5 years having a confidence supply agreement. There was no 9 years of coalition government between the Liberal NDPs in the last 9 years. And you're not allowed to state outright falsehoods under the guise of parliamentary privilege. I'd ask him to withdraw that comment and stick to the truth.
On that point of order.
Chair,
I think my NDP colleague Don Davies needs to listen a little bit better, just because I separated the two things, and in the ruling, which was that our clerk, hardworking clerk, cleared up for us, was that there was a ruling made that it is very factual to say Liberal NDP government. There was a ruling made in the House, and Chair, you're more than welcome to have that same email forwarded to you, that there was a ruling made in the House of Commons on May the 7th, 2024, where they pointed to a ruling from September 24th, 2021, in regards to the same point of order that Mr. Davies brought up about not being able to say Liberal NDP government, which is proven that we can. So I would just revert him and yourself, Chair, to that ruling. So I can.
Thank you for that, MP Allen and MP Davies. I will put that to the side, but I will look into it and what you have said here on the record. Yeah.
So continuing on, this costly coalition Liberal NDP government, which I am allowed to say, blocked their own legislation. Let's not forget, when those witnesses were here, we were hearing testimony. Mr. Turnbull, the parliamentary secretary, for the first time in the history that I've been here, table dropped a motion to block their own legislation on C-69. What would Chrystia Freeland think about that? Is it because maybe Mr. Turnbull supports Mark Carney in his bid to become Liberal leader? He did recently tweet him which could be an endorsement. We don't know. And maybe out of that, maybe try to trick Chrystia Freeland. We just don't know. That's why I think it's important for Mark Carney to be here and for Chrystia Freeland to be here at the same time. But let's not forget that it was the NDP and Mr. Turnbull who Don Davies and Ryan Turnbull came here at the same time. It seems like they had an agenda already preset before they got here and have been trying to stiff arm and heavy hand since
Point of
they
order,
got here.
Mr. Chair. What does my honourable colleague mean, came here at the same time? I'd like to explain that.
I mean, let me clarify. It means around the same time joined this committee. And so in our experience, we've seen nothing but blocking of their own legislation and other heavy-handed things that, of course, as the official opposition, on behalf of Canadians, we won't let happen in this committee. I wanted to address things that my colleague, Ms. Zerowitz, brought up, because I think it's very, very important, and these are some important issues that Canadians and Canadian businesses are facing as well. When we talk about Canadian businesses in this expensive, costly photo-op budget by this Liberal NDP government, they're claiming that they're going to give back carbon tax rebates to businesses. These businesses have been waiting for more than 5 years for this. More than 5 years. They took this money, emissions went up under this pretense that somehow it would fix the environment, which it didn't. Chrystia Freeland said that businesses would somehow be better off and the environment would be better off, Canadians would be better off. None of those things happen. Not a single one of those things happen. In fact, Chrystia Freeland's own environmental department admitted they don't even keep track of the emissions that are tied in with the carbon tax scam. It's a total scam. There is nothing that ties in both things because they know it's just like Justin Trudeau and not worth the cost. That's why. That's why they don't keep track of it. They take more and more from Canadians, and now supposedly they're supposed to be the heroes of small businesses who have suffered with higher taxes, labor shortages, and all sorts of pain that they inflicted on not just the business owners, but the workers of those businesses as well. And so I wanted to address that what a common sense Conservative government would do is not take the money in the first place. You wouldn't need these phony rebates if you didn't take the money away in the first place. Chrystia Freeland has on multiple occasions come to this committee, just like the parliamentary budgeting officer, and has refused to answer what the parliamentary budgeting officer has confirmed on multiple occasions, that most households are worse off when you factor in the economic and physical impacts of the carbon tax. That is exactly what the parliamentary budgeting officer said. So when you have Chrystia Freeland brag day in and day out with the falsehood that somehow this carbon tax is supposed to make life better for Canadians, it's false. The parliamentary budgeting officer said so himself. He proved that this carbon tax scam is not worth the cost. And emissions went up once again. In fact, it's so bad that Canada's ranking for climate change index fell from 58 to 62. Can you believe that? But the carbon tax went up. Can you believe that? It's crazy, I know, Chair. It's crazy that you could raise the carbon tax and fall in the climate change index. Would you believe that? That is the record of 9 years of this government, of their failed policies. But what did that do? Where Chrystia Freeland would tell you that Canadians have never had it so good, well, this carbon tax scam is responsible for 2 million Canadians going into a food bank in a single month, and 1 million more projected to this year. There are families making decisions that they've never had to make before. There's moms who go to the grocery store who spend double the time because they have to pick up food and think twice whether they can afford this or not, where they're having to skip meals. Can you believe that? Canadians are having to skip meals in this country. My family came here as immigrants. like many others, there's many people who grew up here, all saying the same thing. This is not the same Canada that we knew. Because after 9 years of this government, Canada is broken. Despite what the Liberals might try to sell you, it's just like their carbon tax scam. It's just a scam. In fact, 400,000 people left this country last year because of the high cost of living as being one of their #1 reason. That never used to happen before, the stuff that we never heard before. But after 9 years of this government, that's the reality of Canadians today. Canada used to be somewhere where people wanted to come here, they could afford a home, they could run a good business, safe streets, they can send their kids to school, walk alone to school. None of those things are possible anymore after 9 years of this government. This is the Canada that Chrystia Freeland is bragging about after 9 years, that Canadians have never had it so good. You don't have to look very far. You just have to go to some of the streets of our bigger cities to see the crime, chaos, destruction, and what high cost, high deficit governments do to their citizens. Can you believe that we live in a country right now after 9 years where there's teachers and nurses living in their cars because after 9 years of this government, supported by the NDP, they can't afford rent because it's doubled. Mortgages have doubled. In fact, Canadians can't renew their mortgages because of the high interest rates. That's the Canada we live in. And when we talk about food banks, there's phenomenons that we've never seen before. Double income earning family members, two in fact sometimes, that earn good living, they can't afford to eat, heat, or house themselves anymore. That wasn't the promise of Canada. That wasn't the Canadian dream that was promised to those people that came here, that left everything behind to come here for a better future. They were promised that they could afford groceries, to heat their homes, to be able to afford to live in a home, all at the same time. But after 9 years of this government, supported by the NDP, all along the way, this is the reality of Canada. The Canadian dream is broken. The Canadian dream has turned into a nightmare for many people that we talk to. I think that if the Liberals and the NDP would start talking to their constituents, they would realize the pain that it causes. Mr. Jawani clearly outlined what was happening in Mr. Turnbull's own riding, that this wasn't a reality before, but it is now. Yet, virtue signaling and being woke is more important to this Liberal NDP government than actually helping out Canadians. And this budget, this $40 billion of new inflationary net spending, does nothing to help Canadians out. In fact, everyone has seen high interest rates. The governor of the Bank of Canada has been here multiple times and talked about higher rates for longer, and that's the pain that Canadians have to feel. And when asked, he says this government's fiscal policy and his monetary policy are rowing in opposite directions. And it is a factor in why interest rates can't come down. That's why when people are renewing their mortgages, sometimes they're renewing at double or triple the rate. That's why Canadians are now living in their cars, living under bridges and in tents. There's tent cities all across this country like we've never seen before. That's just 9 years of how broken Canada is under this Prime Minister with the help of the NDP. By the way, that keeps this Prime Minister in his place out of greed for their leader's pension. That's what this is all about. And this budget is no different. It's going to keep this Prime Minister in longer, causing more pain for Canadians. Canadians don't see a hope right now at all. A year and a half is a long way for an election. That's why our leader called for a carbon tax election. That if the Liberal NDP government is so sure of their carbon tax scam, why not pause it? Which, by the way, 70% of Canadians before April the 1st, before the Liberal NDP government jacked it up by 23%, 70% of Canadians, including 7 out of 10 premiers, said, spike the hike, do not raise the carbon tax. Yet, they did what they always do. They want to inflict as much pain on Canadians as possible, to raise the price of groceries, gas, and home heating even more. So they refused to listen to Canadians and jacked it up. knowing that 1 million more Canadians would visit a food bank on top of the 2 million that visit a food bank in a single month, despite all of that. So when they talk about fairness, Canadians clearly see that that's not what they're talking about. It might be fairness for the government to collect more from Canadians, but for everyday Canadians, there is no fairness whatsoever. My colleague, Ms. Zerowitz, also brought up money laundering. I'm appalled that she would even bring that up after last week when Conservatives with our Bloc colleague forced a meeting last Friday on money laundering. And once again, the Liberals, along with Don Davies from the NDP, chose to block that very important motion brought by my good friend and great colleague, Adam Chambers. We could have been studying this money laundering issue. It's massive. In fact, it's so big and so important that Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, wrote to this committee, to you, Chair, on October 6, 2023, where she says, "Dear Mr. Fonseca, I am writing to request your assistance with the fourth five-year parliamentary review of the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, and Terrorist Financing Act, or PCML-TFA. This letter goes on to say that the last review of the PCML-TFA was completed in November of 2018. And so this review takes place every 5 years. It's already over what it needs to be. She literally, maybe she was just doing this out of formality, but we take that seriously because not only have there's been 3 different banks that have been allegedly caught up in money laundering. The most recent was TD. TD Bank, and this was the reason why we wanted to call that meeting, which was blocked once again by Mr. Davies and Mr. Turnbull and his crew of Liberals. There was a headline that says TD Bank could face more severe penalties after drug money laundering allegations, says analyst. Bank could face worst case scenario after report connects TD to illicit fentanyl profits. TD probe tied to laundering drug money, says Wall Street Journal. Court documents and sources reveal investigators found evidence of a drug money laundering operation. TD Bank hit with $9.2 million penalty for failing to report suspicious transactions. Canada's Financial Intelligence Agency finds TD as bank faces further compliance probes in the U.S. So my question is, what do these Liberals and Mr. Davies have to hide? Why did they block a common sense Conservative motion from going through? In fact, it's a very good motion. I'll read it in. It's from my friend, Mr. Chambers, from Tuesday, March 19th, 2024, that says, pursuant to Standing Order 1082, and with regards to Section 72 of the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, and Terrorist Financing Act, the committee undertake a study to review the Act and the current situation regarding money laundering and terrorist financing in Canada. That, as a part of the study, the committee calls the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance for no fewer than 2 hours, the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada no fewer than 2 hours, the Minister of Public Safety no fewer than 2 hours, the Minister of National Revenue no fewer than 2 hours, department officials for the Departments of Justice and Public Safety, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre of Canada, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, the Canadian Border Service Security Agency, the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, the Ombudsman for Banking Services and Investments, the Cullen Commission-led Council, Royal Bank of Canada, TD Bank, Bank of Montreal, Scotiabank, CIBC, National Bank, the Ontario Securities Commission, and other witnesses, as submitted by the members of the committee, that the committee take no fewer than 10 meetings for this study and that it reports its finding to the House. So what I don't understand was why even though the Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland, has been asking for this.
Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wonder if you could clarify. Mr. Hallen said that he wasn't passing this motion. I believe he indicated that he's reading a motion. But I would like absolute clarity on what's happening. Is he indeed trying to move this motion, or is it just another example of speaking for hours?
MP Thompson, MP Hallen will clarify what he's doing, but also just on, again, we are speaking to MP Morantz's sub-amendment.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Ms. Thompson was at Friday's committee where her and the Liberals with Don Davies decided to block the motion. So as what was done on Friday, I'm simply reading into the record a motion by my friend Adam Chambers. There was no mention of moving it. There was no mention of putting it on notice. It's on notice already. In fact, Mr. Chambers has already read it into the record once, and so I was just doing that again because Chrystia Freeland, the Minister of Finance, she's the one who requested this. In fact, she's the one who wanted this study to take place. Mr. Chair.
Yeah,
the way Chair, he's talking about a motion that's not being debated, so that has nothing to do.
Yeah, there's a point of order, MP Angus. I've got MP Davies, please.
Thanks. Mr. Angus is my substitute, so maybe I'll make my last point and then I'll turn over to Mr. Angus. What happened on Friday was because we were debating a sub-amendment, there are no motions that are permitted to be moved when we're debating a sub-amendment. And so what happened was the Conservative, I think it was Mr. Chambers, I'm not sure who it was, but I think it was Mr. Chambers, said that, no, he wasn't moving the motion. He was reading into the record. So it's already been read into the record. So I'd ask you, Mr. Chair, to rule on, that there were some of us that thought that there was an attempt to move a motion when you couldn't at that time. But if the objective truly on Friday was just simply to read into the record, it's already been read into the record. And this is a continuation of that meeting. The meeting was suspended on Friday, not adjourned. We're in the same meeting. So I don't think you can read into the record twice. If the true purpose of Mr. Hallen was to simply read the motion and to have the motion read into the record, it's been done that. So his assertion that he's simply reading into the record can't possibly be the case because it's already been done.
Okay, well.
GAC. Anyways, if we can get approval for that, everyone, it has been distributed already. Wonderful, thank you very much. Number 2, the one that never goes away, keeps coming back into its third parliament, the shipbuilding study. Now, this is not to, for us to, or for it getting approved to do it. This is to approve the budget to send to the liaison committee to try again. Had been approved in the past by the House. Last time we sent in was not approved, so we are trying to gain travel if necessary, but not necessary travel. The idea is one trip east, one trip west. The west one being Vancouver, Victoria to Seaspan and the Victoria shipyard. East, of course, will be to Quebec City to Davie and Halifax or Irving. So we have distributed the budgets. If we can just get approval to send to Leah. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you. A couple of things for next week. May 27th, we're doing the red tape, the one that we rescheduled. If you recall, we had one set up. We had to bump them, so that will be on Monday. May 29th, we have agreement. We're doing the main estimates. We'll have Minister Duclos here and Minister Anand, 4:30 to 6:30. I'm not sure who's going to do 4:30 to 5:30 and 5:30 to 6:30. And then 6:30 to 8:30, we're continuing the Canada Post study with the President of Canada Post, just to keep Mr. Backrack happy. So I apologize, everyone. It is going to be a long meeting. But that is next Wednesday.
Sorry, next Wednesday. First 2 hours is going to be the main estimate. Yep. And?
First 2 hours.
The main estimate?
Yes.
And then you said?
And then 6:30 to 8:30 is the President of Canada post.
Okay.
And unfortunately, we have to do it like this because it's the only day that the ministers and the President of Canada post stated that they would agree to attend. So if they had agreed to do different dates, then we would not be sitting for 4 hours, but this is literally the only day that they would agree to. So in order to do so, we're going to make it a long day. I had Mr. Baines first, but let me just go through quickly. And then on June 3rd, if you recall, we agreed that we'd have the officials in for the for PSPC and TBS for the main estimates. So on that date, instead of them being here, for example, 2 hours with Minister Anand, with 1 hour with the minister, 1 hour with the officials, they're going to appear separately, and that would be June 3rd for the main estimates. And then finishing out the month will be filled in with, we have supplementary A's coming out soon, and then we'll have obviously our usual Canada Post, red tape, and other stuff, but we'll fill that in once we get the subs. I had Mr. Baines on the schedule, or what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm not sure I heard a timeline or estimated date on the shipbuilding piece.
What the committee agreed to a long time ago, that would be summer travel. Again, that's if it gets past LEA and if it gets approved by the House and then approved by the parties. So big ifs, but this is the first step.
I will say there is some completion dates in August that are taking place at the C-SPAN in Vancouver shipyard with a couple of the ships. So
I've been speaking to several of the shipyards. They're very anxious to have us not out. No, they've seemed quite anxious to have us out. And it is the largest purchase in the Government of Canada history, but again, it's in the end, it's not up to us. In the end, it's not up to us around the table. Mr. Backrack on the schedule?
I didn't hear clarity on the point when the two ministers show up to talk about estimates. Are they concurrent or sequential? Sequential, 1 hour each?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it's Mr. Anand, then Minister Duclos. Oh, so it'll be Minister Duclos first, and then Minister Anand. They'll have their usual officials with them. But the second hour we normally do solely the officials. We will do that June 3rd.
Thank you, Chair. I heard June 3rd. Is June 5th programmed?
At this time, no.
Thank you.
I'm waiting to see what's coming out with the sup A's. We'll go from there. So that is our schedule coming up. I have Mrs. Block, and then I have Mr. Kuzmierczak, and we've got about 22 minutes. Mrs. Block?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
And up first, though, Mr. Chair, if I'm not mistaken.
Mrs. Block caught my eye first, so Mrs. Block, then yourself, Mr. Kuzmierczak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to move the following motion, that in relation to its study of the ArriveCAN application, Min Doan be ordered to appear before the committee for 3 hours at a date and time to be fixed by the chair, but no later than June 7th, 2024, provided that A, Mr. Doan be offered all the accommodations which had been offered to Christian Firth, and B, if Mr. Doan does not appear as ordered, the chair be directed to report the material facts of the matter to the House forthwith. Really briefly, Mr. Chair, if you all will recall, Mr. Doan had appeared before the committee. Shortly after he appeared, Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano provided testimony that caused us as a committee to agree unanimously that he be called back. And then finally, there was an article that came out in January around the I think getting rid of data files, moving them around and deleting them, that further caused us to want to hear from Mr. Joanne. So I'll leave it there, Mr. Chair, and throw it open for any other comments.
I have Mrs. Kusi. Mrs. Vignola, did you have your hand up? Yeah, okay, Mrs. Kusi, and then Mrs. Vignola.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think it goes without saying that I support the motion as put forward by my colleague. As of January 24th, 2024, Mr. Doan has been on medical leave. This was the time where we first received the document, the letter from his lawyer indicating that he was on this medical leave, and public servants can take a maximum of 27 unpaid sick weeks, but this time is coming to a close. I think that this committee has shown Mr. Doan a significant amount of compassion and has been respectful of his needs and of this time he has needed to heal, to reflect upon the case at hand. But the reality is that he is significantly implicated within the Arrive scandal. First of all, of course, from the point of incompetence, whereby he was simply unable to explain to this group why he was so unaware as to the lack of project management, the lack of documentation, and of course the question that has plagued this committee: who chose GC Strategies? So this is just an incredible amount of incompetence. But more importantly, Mr. Chair, from the position that his actions really would reflect that of those of not having been ethical. First of all, in potentially lying to this committee, first of all, relative to the selection of GC Strategies. He had indicated that his team had chosen GC Strategies, whereas his subordinates, both Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano, were adamant that it was he himself who had made the selection of GC Strategies. And second, relative to his promotion, he had indicated that he had gone through a significant competition relative to receiving his position at Treasury Board. Anyone who has been through a public service substantive process can tell you it is not something that is taken lightly, and that there are many steps, much preparation, and an effort to receive a substantive role within the public service, and certainly one of that significance. But his colleagues, again, countered what he said, and in fact, he, in his testimony to our former NDP colleague here and myself, gave differing information that he had in fact not received the position as a result of a substantive process, but was chosen from it. Of course, as well, we have the issue of him uttering threats to Mr. McDonald after Mr. Doan supposedly received a call from the then Minister of Public Safety, Mr. Mendicino, who I will add has not yet appeared at this committee and should have appeared at this committee by now relative to Arrive scam, but that he apparently, according to Mr. McDonald, called Mr. McDonald at that time and threatened Mr. McDonald's career. So he has to come forward and account for that. This is not to be taken lightly, uttering threats such as this. And of course, as my colleague Mrs. Block had pointed out, the deletion of thousands of emails. We've all certainly deleted an email now and then in error. Something that even deleting a single email brings about much stress, much concern, but deleting thousands of emails, which explains many administrative gaps, in fact, Mr. Chair, but he denies this as well. So it's just evident that Mr. Doan is a significant part of the Arrive scam scandal. He is a piece of the puzzle. And most importantly, Mr. Chair, he must be held accountable for both his incompetence and his unethical behavior. There comes a time, Mr. Chair, where everyone has to pay the piper, and Mr. Doan's time has arrived. And therefore, I support Mrs. Block's motion and hope my colleagues will agree that it is long past the time Mr. Doan come before this committee and explain his actions. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Mrs. Vignola.
Thank you very much, Chair. I agree with the facts that Mr. Doan and the evidence that we've heard at the committee, and those of Mr. Doan, Mr. McDonald, and Hutano have been contradictory. We are in a situation where we have a raft of testimony that is quite contradictory and needs to be clarified. Some will say that they're trying to serve as scapegoats. Might be the argument that was proposed by others, and everybody's just kicking the can down the road or trying to throw the ball in the other's court. Mr. Doan purportedly is sort of medical difficulties. I don't have any notion as to what it is, and I might be completely in the weeds on that. But what I'd like to stress is that it's important to have a comprehensive view, to get some proper explanations, and if we can cast light on the situation. We are neither judge nor jury. We're there to improve processes, and if there were malfeasance of some sort, that does never repeat itself, and that the controls or the safeguards should be improved to ensure that all officials can do their job in the public interest and not in their private gain. And we're encompassing all 300,000 functionaries and bureaucrats in that, but some wear the hat better than others. There's a line that must not be crossed. That of perception of intimidation, bullying, threats, never, never. We serve as a model, an example of what it should be. Now, we don't want to be seen to be crossing a line or accepting behavior that crosses the line. We are honorable members, and we should be seen as honorable. And that's my concern. If he doesn't come because his 27 days of medical leave, well, okay, so he could have brought them forward. But, he might decide that he's sick and he's going to go unemployed and collect some kind of benefit. Are we going to be criticized for bringing a person who is ill to comply with an appearance? And if that becomes routine, how can it be exceptional? I mean, there's nothing exceptional about repeating what they say, keep repeating the same thing expecting a different result. It doesn't work. So 2 years of So my concerns, questions I ask myself, what we have to reflect on. Yes, I do want to get some clarification. I want some answers to our questions. But I won't be bullied by a bully. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to move an amendment, which is that we strike or remove all of B from the original motion, and so that is section B, which reads, if Mr. Doan does not appear as ordered, the chair be directed to report the material facts of the matter to the House forthwith. And if I can speak to that, I would appreciate the opportunity.
So it's just eliminating B? Our speaking list on the amendment? Are you going to speak on that? Oh, go ahead, sir.
Yeah. Thank you,
Sorry,
Chair.
you had stopped, I thought. Go ahead.
No, I wanted to say that, we obviously as a committee have important questions to ask Mr. Doan. And the next logical step in this progression in the investigation and the work of this committee is to hear directly from Mr. Doan. Obviously, we're trying to be sensitive to the fact that there are some serious medical issues that have come to light as well too. But we do believe that that is the next logical step, is to hear directly from Mr. Doan, and so we support the motion to bring Mr. Doan here to committee. I don't believe that that Part B is necessary at this stage. I believe that let's take this step by step, which is let's hear from Mr. Doan himself. Let's obviously communicate at the meeting what the repercussions are. If there isn't additional cooperation, that can be clarified during the meeting. But I do believe that at this stage, let's take this step by step. The next logical step is to call him to this committee, but there is no requirement at this point to include Section B in this motion. And so I'd like that section to be struck. At the same time, we know that there is important work that Parliament is doing at this point, especially in relation to debating the budget and debating important legislation, and we don't want to tie up the work of the House that is laser focused on those issues. And so again, we are supportive of calling Mr. Doan to testify in front of this committee. We think that is the logical next step, but I would ask that Part B be stricken from that motion.
Okay. Mr. Jenis on the amendment.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In terms of the proposed amendment, I think it's just important to be clear about the process. So we're proposing that the committee order Mr. Doan to appear, and it seems that there's agreement on that in principle, which is great. The question is, what if he doesn't appear? Now, I think if we have a clear consequence in there, which is that we would report on the matter to the House, that increases the chances that Mr. Doan will appear. So if we don't have Part B, the chances that the committee get simply blown off are much higher. With Part B in there, I think almost certainly he will appear, because we've already established that there is a path for a consequence. I don't think it's very likely that consequence will be triggered, because with B in there, it's a clear message that he needs to appear. If B's out there, then it's ambiguous whether there would be any kind of follow-up next step. But let's also be clear in terms of the nature of that process that would follow. It's always up to the majority, right? It's the reason Mr. Firth appeared before the bar was because the majority, in fact, as the case was unanimously, the House agreed to a motion to bring him before the bar. So the outcomes are always going to be controlled by the majority. It's not up to us as one party to determine what the next step is. But I do think B is valuable because it establishes what happens if Mr. Doan doesn't appear, and establishing that means he's much more likely to appear. If we pass this motion without Part B, I think the chances are higher that he simply doesn't appear, and then we're back here all over again. So that's on that basis, we would suggest leaving B in and that the amendment not be supported. Thanks.
Yeah. I see no one else, so we'll go to a vote. Mr. Clerk? On the amendment.
Ms. Atwin.
In favor.
Mr. Baines.
Yes.
Mr. Johari.
Yes.
Mr. Kusmirchuk.
Support.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
Ms. Block.
No. No.
Mr. Jenis.
No.
Ms. Kuzi.
Opposed.
Madame Vignola.
Oui.
Mr. Backrack.
Yes.
So yeas pour 7, nays contre 3, 3.
So the amendment passes. So we have an amended motion, which is just the first part. Anyone wish to speak to it, or can we go to a vote on that? Looks like we're going to go to a vote.
Okay. Ms. Atwin.
In favor.
Mr. Baines.
Yes.
Mr. Johari.
Yes.
Mr. Kusmirchuk.
Yes.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
Ms. Block.
Yes.
Mr. Jenis.
Yes.
Ms. Kuzi.
In favor.
Madame Vignola. Mr. Backrack.
Yes.
Yeas pour 10, 10. Nays contre, 0, 0.
Motion passes. Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Mr. Kusmirchuk, but keep in mind we've got about 5 minutes, so please speak fast.
So I'd like to put a motion forward, and the motion is the following, and it's going to be distributed as well to the clerk to distribute to the committee. And the motion is that given the recent media reports that Conservative Party of Canada members use taxpayer funds to benefit themselves, their spouses, and their staff by expensing hundreds of thousands of dollars to attend partisan events, the committee condemned the hypocrisy of Conservative members, flagrant disregard for taxpayer money, and demand a commitment to cease such practices. And I'm happy to speak to that motion.
I bet you are. Go ahead, Mr. Kusmirchuk. You've got about 4 minutes.
It's a point of order I'd like to raise. I'd like for you to maybe rule whether or not this motion is in order. And if you'll bear with me, I do have a couple quick arguments I want to make with respect to whether or not it's in order. First of all, the mandate of the Government Operations Committee is to deal with operational matters involving the Government of Canada. It sounds like Mr. Kusmirchuk would like to have a discussion about House of Commons operations. We have a procedure in House Affairs Committee which is responsible for dealing with matters involving the procedures of the House of Commons. From what I know, the government is trying to bring this up at multiple committees, which is a tactic I've never heard of being used before by any other members of this House. But Mr. Chair, this isn't being recorded, is it not? No, but Chair, I appreciate the levity from other members, but in all seriousness, there are mandates, of course, that the standing orders do prescribe for specific committees. The Government Operations Committee is responsible for government operations. We don't, of course, have an Opposition Operations Committee, but we do have a procedure in House Affairs Committee that is responsible for dealing with matters related to procedure at House Affairs. We also have a Board of Internal Economy that governs the rules of the House of Commons, and it includes representation from all parties. The Board of Internal Economy is a place where the rules of the House are established and where if there is an allegation that rules of the House were broken. I don't think there is an allegation here that rules of the House were broken. There's maybe an allegation that the rules shouldn't be what they are. But if members want to change rules or study rules as they relate to House of Commons activities, then the Board of Internal Economy would also be a place where this matter could be studied. But this committee does have a clear, specific mandate. It's looking at operations of government. We look at the activities of Crown Corporation. So that's one area in which I would appreciate you, Chair, reflecting on and ruling on whether or not this motion is in order. Secondly, there are rules around the use of parliamentary language in the House, in committees, and of course in motions that have been put forward. And I would also suggest that, although of course we do criticize each other from time to time in the context of parliamentary committees, that there are certain words we cannot use. Members aren't able to accuse each other of lying. They're not able to cast other kinds of aspersions, use profanity, these sorts of things. And I do think that Mr. Kusmirchuk's motion. I mean, I'm not suggesting he wrote these words himself. It's probably some poorly paid government staffer. But the language in there is not in keeping with parliamentary rules and orders. So I do, on the basis of the mandate of the committee chair, as well as on the basis of unparliamentary language, I wonder if you could just reflect on whether or not this motion is in order. I am if it's in order, I welcome hearing Mr. Kuzmierczuk's comments. Pardon me?
So maybe I can.
Hola, senor. We are gringos who wish to spend mucho dinero in your country.
Splendid. Welcome to Canada.
Go! Oh, Canada! So to win Greta back, I have to go to Toronto.
Canada? Why should we leave America to visit America Junior?
Coming up next, a Canadian couple who say they are deathly afraid of scorpions.
Oh, that stings, eh?
Oh, God! Sting those Canucks.
I love this show. Take that, you stupid hosers!
Tonight, Canada turns to its most famous director, Ivan Reitman, the man who brought us Ghostbusters.
Hello, Calais, we're in luck. They had a Magnum at the shoe counter. I knew it. You're there. Just here.
Oh, hello. Do you have a warrant to be here?
Maybe there's a little grass growing right along here. Some happy little things.
I love you. You love me. We all own our own bodies, so marry who you want and do whatever drugs you choose. And when it's time, you can die with dignity by determining your own end-of-life plan.
Hi, Maria!
Hi, Officer Winkles!
How you doing today?
I don't have to answer that question.
That is correct!
I'm recording you!
Am I being detained?
Nope!
Which I can legally do because I'm in a public place!
Come back if you have a warrant!
Alrighty!
Know your rights!
Yay!
Okay, Gumshoes, Carmen Sandiego is in a country where socialism failed. That narrows it down to Venezuela, Cuba, the former Soviet Union, Moldova, Laos, Vietnam, Albania, Angola. So we did some digging into your past.
Oh, this suspense is killing me! But we still haven't solved the case, Holmes. Why is marijuana a Schedule I drug?
Elementary, my dear Watson. Nixon and racism.
What?
You okay? I don't know. Hey man, it's alright. It's alright. We've got qualified immunity. Qualified immunity. It's not for you, it's just for me. I shot your dog. I shot your wife. I get to go on with my life.
My favorite part is where the character says, I do not want green eggs and ham. And then Sam I Am says, that's fine. You don't have to eat them. That's your right. The end. It's a short book.
Here we see one of the last taxicab monopolies struggling for life. Competitors have entered their ecosystem.
Do you know what eminent domain abuse is? It's when the government decides the neighborhood of make-believe is better used by a Taiwanese LCD manufacturer.
Today we have a real senator. Hello, Senator.
How are you doing?
What is your favorite color?
I would have to say blue.
Me too. Tell me, why did you sell all your stock right before the crash?
I mean, it's literally just the tragedy of the commons, but they made it cute.
And that sound means we're in international waters. I'm gonna marry a robot and sell my kidney on eBay.
My dearest Rowena, today the district attorney filed criminal charges against a two-door sedan.
Carmen Sandiego is hiding in a country that contains an American military base. Is she in Australia, Bahrain, Belgium, Brazil, Bulgaria, the British Indian Ocean Territory, Cuba, Germany, Djibouti?
Menace.
Circle, square, rectangle, war factory.
All right, Jack, where is your gay wedding cake?
I refuse to bake a gay wedding cake, and you can't force me to. It's my right.
That is your right, but it is my right to kick you off of this show. Please leave.
Yep.
You homophobic bearded meat goblin.
I just want enough to warm it up some. I don't want to set it on fire. It's very easy to set it on fire.
Well, today on This Old House, we're at the city zoning office because they think our new porch is 2 inches too close to the sidewalk, which is f***ing bullshit because their sidewalk is too far away from the street which they'd know about if they'd read any of the emails I'd sent them over the past 18 months. So join us as we waste our whole f***ing day on the
The premiere of Thomas the High-Speed Rail has been delayed again. And at the 10 Bitcoin level, you receive a handsome tote bag.
Quack! Good one! Quiet! Very good! Queen! What else starts with the letter Q?
Space lasers.
Oh!
John Podesta and Hillary Clinton had an email exchange about hot dogs.
Where do we get these puppets?
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, and you have a right to defend your house with firearms. With firearms.
Namibia lies in southwest Africa. The Namib Desert stretches for almost 2,000 kilometers along the coast. To the north, the desert is crisscrossed by several dry river valleys. One of them is the Namib Valley. It runs through the desert for several hundred kilometers and ends in the sea. Water flows here once, at most twice a year. Only deep-rooted plants like anna trees can survive here. Only here, within the valley, can mammals exist in the long term. It is the home of the desert elephants. In contrast to their other African relatives, desert elephants live in particularly small family groups. They are so rare and their way of life is so special that they're under the constant supervision of scientists who have also given the elephants names. The head of this family is alpha cow Clarissa. The animals don't leave her side for a moment. Only Clarissa knows how to survive in this extreme environment. The shoots of the anna tree are now ripe. The pods contain protein-rich seeds. Clarissa has known every one of these trees since her childhood. Even the youngest, Maya, tries the shoots. Here, however, experienced trunk tip control is required. It's easier for her to get the protein she needs from her mother's milk. Desert elephants only have half the number of calves as other elephants. The male animals stay with their mother's family until they reach sexual maturity. With mock fights, they prepare for life without the protection of the females. Adult bull elephants are loners or travel in small groups. Jappy is the most skillful of them. His younger brother watches enviously as Jappy brings down apparently unreachable branches from the tree. In the valley, Jappy is well known for such tricks. He learned them from his father. Friendship among bull elephants has its limits. Jappy is certainly not willing to share his branch with his younger brother. Their father, One Tusk, is now nearly 60 years old. His trademark is the missing right tusk, lost long ago in a hierarchical battle. For years, he was the undisputed king of the Huanib. Now he lives in seclusion. One tusk's legs are weak. He can no longer keep up. The aging bull is already being watched by a male jackal, which lives in the Huanib Valley with its partner. Jackals mostly hunt smaller animals, but they wouldn't turn their noses up at a dead elephant. In a side valley, Clarissa has discovered a further source of food. There's a wide selection of bushes, grasses, and herbs. The elephant's climbing skills far surpass those of their savanna-dwelling relatives. This, too, is a form of adaptation to their special habitat. Old One Tusk has at last reached one of the anna trees in the Huanib Valley. But Clarissa and co. haven't left very much for him to eat. He desperately searches for something edible in the remnants. In vain. For the inhabitants of the Namib, survival is hard. They're used to going for long periods without water. Many get liquid from their food or know secret sources of water. Regardless of size, every green leaf contains a minimum of liquid worth harvesting. Outside the dry river valleys, there is scarcely any vegetation. Here, only extreme specialists survive. The Namib desert beetle is no bigger than a fingernail. As all animals, it depends on water for survival and has developed a special strategy. Even the tiniest traces of dampness in the air condense on its carapace. In time, a drop forms, which then flows directly into the beetle's mouth. This way of life limits the distribution of desert beetles to those parts of the desert that see fog. But where does the fog come from? The Namib is one of the few deserts in the world that stretch to the sea. The cold Benguela current from the Antarctic cools the seawater to a temperature of 12 degrees Celsius. When the water reaches land, it evaporates in the warm desert air. Around 200 days a year, the desert is wreathed in mist, which sometimes extends hundreds of kilometers inland into the dry river valleys. The Benguela current doesn't only bring fog, it's also rich in fish. The animals that benefit most are the brown fur seals. Their colonies are often home to 100,000 animals. Right now, there's good reason for so many seals to congregate here. The mating season is just beginning. Everywhere, bulls are fighting for the right to mate. The strongest conquer a whole harem and then have their flippers full. After mating, the males disappear into the sea. They're not involved in bringing up the young. The fog sometimes penetrates as far as the Namib Valley. Now, even the biggest animals benefit from the moisture contained in the fog. Jappy and his brother can take on a lot of liquid from the drops of dew on the plants they eat. This allows the elephants to go without water for up to 4 days at a time. The pair are still on the move together. This will soon change. As the fog lifts, the sun illuminates a very special event. Families of elephants from other dry river valleys are on their way to the Namib Valley. They're following the calls of their relatives, which they pick up via the soles of their feet, as via a stethoscope. More and more elephants join Clarissa's family. Some of the animals haven't seen each other for years and exchange affectionate greetings. Jappy and his brother are also aware of the arrival of the females. When it comes to attracting a cow, in a flash, companions become rivals. Once upon a time, one tusk was also aroused by all the excitement. Today, it no longer has any significance for him. He wouldn't be able to deal with confrontations with other bulls. His sons and grandsons, on the other hand, are very excited. For them, it's important to make the most of the female's willingness to mate and prevent others from taking advantage. In the end, however, Jappy only manages to achieve his goal by means of a trick. He abducts the alpha cow, Clarissa. While many of the inhabitants of the valley spend the night hours asleep, this is the time of the real desert dwellers. The Namib sand gecko is only active at night. In the darkness, the little predator looks for crickets and spiders. Like a frog's, its toes are webbed. This enables the lizard to seemingly fly across the dunes without sinking into the sand. But it also needs to be on the lookout. a sidewinding adder. Similar to desert elephants, beetles, and geckos, the snake has a hard life in the Namib. It has to hunt successfully to survive. Once it finds a good spot for an ambush, it goes to ground. The snake is a predator that lies in wait for its prey, relying completely on its camouflage. For the sensitive gecko, it's time to go. In the sun, it would quickly dehydrate. Here, too, webbed feet come in handy. The lizard uses its legs as scoops to quickly dig out astonishing underground passages. It can make tunnels 1 meter long into the ground. Here, it's safe. Up at ground level, another gecko isn't in quite such a hurry. With good reason. The fog is coming. The lizard's large, mirror-like eye surfaces allow the fog to condense here. At last, water. The waiting paid off. This morning, the sidewinding adder can have breakfast and get some liquid into the bargain. The Namibian winter is coming to an end, and with it, the mild climate brought by the fog. Relentless heat descends on the Huanib Valley. 40 degrees Celsius in the shade. This is approaching the limit for even Clarissa's family. Elephants don't sweat, and so protect themselves against overheating by fanning their ears. But it seems too hot, even for that. The heat is hard to bear for all the animals, but for the youngest, the sun can be lethal. Maya is really suffering. One tusk mobilizes all his efforts for one last attempt at an anna tree. But he no longer has the strength. Exhausted, he withdraws to the shade. During his long life, his legs have carried him more than 400,000 kilometers. As with most bull elephants, the last few steps he will take alone. Despite the heat, Clarissa can't afford to take a break. She urges her family to move on. Desert elephants have to spend up to 20 hours a day eating 200 kilos of plant material. As tiring as that may be, Clarissa's family have no choice. One young bull is already so exhausted that he sleeps through the signal to move off. He only wakes up when the other elephants are already out of sight.
This show was created for you and your family to watch together. Welcome to Nat Geo Wild.
It finally dawns on him that he really is all alone. Clarissa and the rest of the family have noticed his absence. The animals try to locate each other via smell using their trunks, which are extraordinarily sensitive. In the end, it's Maya who gives the decisive call. Now the straggler knows which way to go. The extremely dry period shows no sign of coming to an end. 1 week later, the heat and the elephants have combined to decimate the plant life in the Namib Valley. Vultures take up positions on the trees on the edge of the valley. Their time will come when the other animals can find nothing more to eat. For Clarissa's family, a dead tree now becomes the sole source of food. In the desert, a tree of this size takes years to break down. And it's the elephants that turn it into food again for the other animals. They themselves only use 60% of what they eat. The rest they excrete undigested. In this way, they distribute seeds, like those of the anna tree. Some animals, like the helmeted guinea fowl, take the majority of their food from what the elephants deposit. In times of scarcity, even the Namib Valley baboons look for something edible in the elephant's dung. Old One Tusk has one more go at the wood. But elephant molars only grow back 6 times. One Tusk's teeth are worn out, and his attempt to eat wood the way he used to is doomed to failure. In other parts of Africa, older elephants seek out swamps where they can live for a while longer on softer leaves. Here, there is no such possibility. For Clarissa, too, the situation is becoming threatening. She and her family must leave the valley and seek food and water elsewhere. Other families join the trek. Only Clarissa's knowledge of hidden water sources can save them now. Scarcely any animals are left in the valley. Even the jackals are leaving. In their search for food, they will move along the Namib Valley until they reach the coast. Only One Tusk is too old and too tired for the trek. The one thing that could save him now is rain that would let soft grass grow. With this slim hope, he remains behind. The Namib desert beetle is also looking for something to eat. In contrast to most of the desert dwellers, it is not seeking fresh young shoots. The beetle is on the lookout for plant residues. The unceasing wind is a help. It sweeps fragments of plant life together in valleys and hollows between the dunes. Mostly it's just a few bits of leaf. But sometimes it collects and becomes something like a herbal rubbish dump. Although the plants are completely dried out, they still contain important nutrients. The Namakwa chameleon is one of the most dangerous hunters in the Namib desert. For desert beetles, at any rate. But the beetles don't usually make it quite so easy. The beetles aren't only full of protein, but also provide essential liquids for the lizard. Namakwa chameleons are the biggest reptiles the Namib can support. In contrast to the mammals, they can't undertake long migrations to look for food and water. Similar to the Huanib, a river once flowed here. Along its banks, animals like chameleons penetrated deep into the desert. Hundreds of years ago, the dunes slowly invaded the riverbed and cut off the water supply. This process was so slow, however, that the animals had time to adapt to the new conditions. The mammals didn't need such a long period of adaptation. Their ability to migrate over long distances enabled them to conquer the desert much more quickly. The pair of jackals will soon reach the coast. Clarissa, meanwhile, is still searching for water. Little Maya is already exhausted. The group has to keep stopping. The animals are reaching the limits of their strength. Clarissa can produce less and less milk for her daughter. Suddenly, a commotion as Maya sinks to her knees. But Clarissa urges her offspring onwards. It is their only chance. As dusk falls, they finally arrive. Thanks to Clarissa's knowledge, there's something to drink at last. Adult elephants can get by on 100 liters of water a day. The subsequent dust bath serves to protect the elephant's skin from the relentless sun. The trek to the next source of food is long. The following morning, Clarissa will move on. The jackals have finally reached the sea and move southwards along the coast. The new generation of brown fur seals is just arriving. Many of the mother animals are heavily pregnant. This young mother hasn't long to go. The mother at once welcomes her offspring into the world. Each voice and scent is as unique as a fingerprint. The ritual creates an unbreakable bond between mother and pup. Directly after the birth, the pup has to be suckled. The newborn is a little clumsy. The young mother is not alone. Tens of thousands of other females have also given birth. Space is at a premium in the colony. A risky situation for the babies. To minimize the danger, the seals organize a kindergarten. Many of the mother animals leave their newly born pups here. The nursery not only offers the young pups protection, but also makes it easier to find them later. The mother seals have to go out hunting every day to make sure their milk is nutritious enough for the young. But when choosing the location of the kindergarten, they forgot about the tide. The pups fight desperately against the onslaught of the waves. The baby is washed out to sea along with the other newborn seals. Seal pups can swim, but they don't have the protective layer of fat of adult animals. The pup fights for survival. Another is slowly but surely losing the battle. Within a few minutes, the pups are so exhausted that they can no longer keep their heads above water and drown. The next morning reveals how great the danger posed by the sea is for the seal pups. The shore is full of little corpses, washed up by the tide. The jackals from the Namib. The pair have traveled hundreds of kilometers from the arid valley. The seal colony is now their only chance of food. Jackals aren't choosy. For them, eating carrion is nothing unusual. They'll be spending the coming weeks at the seal colony. Only when the pups are old enough to swim enduringly, and thus the supply of food runs out, will the jackals return to the Huanim Valley. It's not only the jackals that undertake such long treks. The other inhabitants of the Huanim have a long way to go. An oasis hidden deep in the desert. Oasis. It lies like an emerald in the middle of the desert. A thin band of loose vegetation lines the watering hole. The pied crows are getting worked up about something. Visitors. Big visitors. The legendary desert lions. Desert lions are so unbelievably rare that scientists have fitted them with transmitter collars so that the big cats can be monitored and protected. 2 females have taken up positions in the undergrowth with their young. The experienced predators know that it's just a matter of watching and waiting. And indeed, many animals are making their way here. The oryx's numbers have thinned noticeably. Some are lagging far behind the main column. After more than 10 days' trek, the first animals finally reach the source. Cautiously, they approach the steep bank. They're in danger of sinking into the soft ground. The pied crows sound the alarm again. The lioness's patience has been rewarded. They've caught one of the stragglers. One lioness keeps the oryx in check on the ground. The hunting lioness is completely exhausted. Fighting the antelope has taken the last of her strength. She drags herself back to the bushes to get her cubs. The other lioness keeps the pesky crows at bay. Luckily for the huntress, the cubs quickly grasp the situation. They can hardly wait to get their teeth into some fresh food. All the animals here are fighting for survival. The lionesses won this round. They've enough food now to last the coming weeks. Clarissa and her family have finally reached the neighboring Dry River Valley. The experienced cow knew instinctively that, in times of drought, there was some precious greenery here to feed on. The exhausted animals can at last fill their stomachs again. And this is how a happy, full-up baby elephant looks. Maya in paradise. A strong wind blows in from the coast. and sandstorms form in the hinterland. They reach the river valley where Clarissa and family have found food and shelter. Sandstorms like these are the harbingers of heavy rain. Experienced elephant cows like Clarissa know what that means. As soon as it rains, the dry river valleys will be turned into raging torrents that wash away anything in their path. Imminent danger for the family of elephants. Time to move on again. Now the safest place to be is outside the valleys. How right Clarissa was can be seen the following day. Water in the dry river valley. Only every 10 years or so is the rain strong enough for the flood wave to reach the sea. Just a few days later, the first green shoots begin the transformation of the dry river valleys. The Namib Valley, too, is bursting with new life as the first exiles return. For one animal, however, the rain came too late. Old One Tusk succumbed to hunger before the first drops fell. The jackals find his body on the edge of the valley. The jackals don't approach the body until evening. And thus, the circle of life is complete. The next morning, long unheard calls echo through the valley. Clarissa is back. Her family survived the floods unscathed. Maya, too, is thriving. At last, the newly greened Namib Valley comes into view. Clarissa's family is home again. Jappy will pass on the genes of his father, One Tusk, and with them, his strength and intelligence. Clarissa is pregnant with his baby. The alpha cow will induct each new generation into the secrets of the desert elephants. This is essential for their survival. The Namib River Valley is probably the last real wilderness in Namibia, one in which only the cleverest, most intelligent of the animal world can survive. A life of extremes in the home of the desert elephants.
We can fish like a Newfoundlander.
We can dig potatoes in PEI.
We grow wheat in the golden prairies.
Cross Rockies we can fly.
From shore to shore.
From shore to shore. And in between.
And in between.
The old
and young.
The rich and poor. The tall and short. The English, French.
The Greek and Chinese too.
Yeah! We're Canadian. Through and through. We're glad that you're Canadian too. We need not look or sound the same. place where we want to stay. Hey, 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 hey. We can fish like a Newfoundlander.
We can dig potatoes in PEI.
We grow wheat in the golden prairies.
Across the Rockies we can fly. We're Canadian through and through. We're proud that you're Canadian.